Hi, I'm here with Maureen from Radiant Mourning, and it is morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Kathleen. How are you?
I am really good. I'm so glad that you're doing this with me because I really want to make sure we get out the word about what you do, why you do it, and how somebody could get started. So, how about if you tell me what brought you into end of life and what is Radiant Mourning?
Well, I have been a nurse for well over 30 years, working mostly in end of life fields. And it was just a chance conversation with someone that dealt with grief and was bringing it to the forefront to deal with grief well before it's ever an issue.
Mhm.
One thing led to another, and I have stepped into the role of helping people get their end of life wishes decided, documented, and then discussed with their families so that the families don't have to guess at the end of life. Like if something happened, either that tragic accident or um, the disease that has taken them to the final days, and the family has no idea
Mhm.
what their loved one would want because they never had these conversations. So that's the whole my whole goal is to get families talking about these important end of life issues well before they're an issue.
Yeah, you always hear those stories where it's a disaster for the family, not knowing and then arguing at the end. What's the number one concern that comes up when people get started to do this, to do their end of life wishes?
I think that the number one concern is that they have a hard time putting themselves in the place of, oh my gosh, there's fear around talking about death.
Mhm. Mhm.
And they have a hard time figuring out what they would want if they were in that, because it's hard to conceptualize and put yourself in that position of being at the end of life. So I think getting people comfortable talking about it, and that the more we plan, the better quality end of life we can have through planning. So, but the biggest thing is fear of speaking about it.
Yeah, you're making me think. Maureen and I are part of the Gentle Passage Doula Collective, and we host death cafes for that reason, so people can actually hear and talk about death and dying. And that's one opportunity to get some of those fears.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
How do you work through those fears?
Well, one of the ways I have a woman I'm working with now who I really honor her for doing this, because she has this great fear that by talking about it, she's going to manifest her own death
Mhm.
or uh, speed up the process. So just talking through and listening, asking open-ended questions that helps her explore. So anyone explore why they have these feelings. It's going back a lot to how they've experienced death in their lives. Was it positive? Was it a
Mhm.
negative experience? And extrapolating from there how they've come to this point in time. So it turns out this woman that I'm working with has had experienced a lot of death in her life, and not many of them have been positive, haven't been peaceful. So that's where her fear comes in, that she will have a difficult death like her family did. And it all circles back to not talking about it. They
Yeah,
never spoke about it, and they never knew what anyone wanted. So,
that makes sense. Yeah. So what's the biggest surprise for you in doing this work? Anything come up and be a big surprise when you're working with people?
oh gosh, there's so many surprises, so many. But I think that the big surprise is that people really want to talk about this. They just don't know how. They're afraid to talk to their parents because they don't want their parents to think that all they're thinking about is their when they die and what they get, what.
Mhm.
But I've had people say to me, oh, I don't want to talk to my parents. I don't want them to think we're just trying to get our inheritance. And so I think that realizing that the parents want to talk about this too, they just don't want to upset their adult children. So each person wants to talk about it, but they're afraid of upsetting the other.
Mhm.
That's
I'm wondering how people work through that resistance when one person wants to talk about it. You hear that happen in couples or among siblings trying to work things out with their parents.
You know, it happened just with my mom and dad. When my dad was diagnosed with lung cancer, and on that journey, my mom did not want to talk about it. She didn't want to get, oh, his happiest day was when I called and she was at the cemetery getting the plot. You know, for 10 years, he had been trying to get her to agree to buy their plots.
Mm.
Uh, Compassion. I tell people, get your own plans in order. Get your work done, because you might lead by example, but have compassion on those that can't go there right now, and just keep trying to gently approach the topic. So we have some tools that I help people with on approaching the topic with those that are resistant.
Okay, great. And then if you were to give the first thing that people need to do, like if you were to set out priorities for somebody, what would be the number one thing with end of life planning and paperwork that you just feel like is absolutely has to be done?
Choose the person to be your healthcare power of attorney, healthcare advocate. There's so many different names for the same
Yeah.
position, but someone that can speak on your behalf should you become unable to do so.
Mhm.
And talk to that person, ask their permission, ask them if they would accept that role, and get that documented legally in paperwork. There's many different advanced directives forms. That's the getting everything documented. It's called advanced directive, and get it witnessed and notarized so that if anything does happen, you have someone that can legally speak on your behalf.
Yeah, one thing, Maureen, about sitting in on some of the talks that you've given and webinars and listening to some of your videos, one thing that really strikes me is you being in nursing for so long and having the perspective you have. How would you say that's developed, informed how you talk about it and think about this?
You know, I remember it was over 25 years ago. I had a patient that I took care of, and I had had other patients, but this one just so powerfully hit me that I never wanted my family or anyone that I loved to go through this situation. She was 62,
Mhm.
had played tennis in the morning, driving her 85-year-old mother home from a doctor's appointment in the afternoon when she had a heart attack, slumped over the wheel of the car, and she ended up in the ICU. I was her nurse. 2 days later, she was declared brain dead. She had no brain activity. And she had 4 children, no power of attorney. They had never spoken of this. You know, their mom was 62, healthy, active. And the fighting between the siblings was, I'm sure they still don't speak to this day, or at least they're divided. It was so awful. And she was kept alive for 6.5 weeks before she just naturally died.
Wow.
And she was on a ventilator 6.5 weeks. But it was the fighting and the fractured family that I thought, I never want that to happen to anyone that I know and love. So I became a powerful advocate for powers of attorney for healthcare. And I was always telling everyone that I would listen. You need a power of attorney for healthcare. You need someone to speak for you on your behalf if you can't speak, because that morning they never dreamed their mother would never wake up again, that they would never be able to speak to her, or they just didn't know what she wanted. And that was the pivotal moment for me
Yeah,
in my
that's a
career.
powerful story. Yeah, nobody wants that to envision
No,
that. And no
it
one
was
thinks it could happen to them, right?
no one thinks it could happen to them. And that's why from 18 on, none of us think we can be in that terrible accident
Mhm.
that will leave us unable to make our own healthcare decisions. You know, we leave for work one morning and things change. So being prepared, we plan for everything in our lives, weddings, graduations, holidays. So plan for the most inevitable. It's inevitable that
Yeah,
we're going to die. None of us are getting out of this life alive. So it's even more certain than taxes. So plan for it so you can have the end of life that
true.
you want. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. Is there anything else before we get your information about how to get a hold of you that you want to share?
That just to keep reiterating, talk to your family, keep talking to them. And especially with COVID, it's the best time. You know, we're all having it brought to our awareness that life is precious and we don't know what tomorrow brings. So
Right.
talk to your families about what you'd want. It's easy. Just say, hey, gosh, with all this COVID, I just heard of another famous person that's been diagnosed with COVID. How
Mhm.
would we handle it? This has made me think, how would we handle it?
Mhm.
And get this conversation started there.
Yeah, especially many families can't be at the bedside making the
Oh,
decisions and watching step by step as an advocate. So that's the other thing, the conversations beforehand to be really.
beforehand, because that has been heartbreaking to me, knowing how important it is to have families at that bedside and to not be there. It's just, I have been grief stricken over that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thank you. So can you tell people what's the best way to get a hold of you, and also maybe a service that you have coming up that people could learn about?
Well, the best way to get a hold of me, you can get to my website by going to startthethalknow.com. And I do have a free offering, 7 prompts to get the conversation started. And I am offering a course. My next course will start in January. It's a 5-week course with the end in mind to get all of the end of life planning documented, and a template to get it discussed with your family, to host your own family meeting, to get the conversation started, to get that candid conversation started.
Okay, wonderful. So startthethalknow.com.
Startthethalknow.com.
All right, great. Thanks so much, Maureen. It's such a
Thank you,
pleasure having
Kathleen.
you.
Thank you.